The sound wasn't a crack or a snap, but a wet, sickening thud, like a massive bag of concrete being dropped on the soft earth just beyond the periphery of the light. I froze, my hand hovering over the latch of the heavy oak door I had just secured for the night. The clock in the kitchen read 11:47 p.m. I live deep in the woods, bordering the edge of the land between the lake's national recreation area, where sounds are either the rustle of leaves or the purposeful tread of something heavy. This was the latter, compounded by a silence that fell immediately afterward, a silence far more unnatural than the sound itself. It was the absolute void that happens when every small, natural thing in the forest decides, in unison, to hold its breath. For a terrifying, drawn-out minute, there was nothing. No wind. No cricket. My old Labrador, Barnaby, who usually stirred at the slightest breeze, was pressed against the bottom of the wood stove, his body rigid and emitting a low, continuous rumble I hadn't heard since a severe thunderstorm 6 years prior. Then came the smell. It was an overwhelming wave of something rank and metallic, but underneath that, a musky, animalistic stink that was somehow far worse. It was the smell of sickness and ancient, unwashed decay, overlaid with the sharp, coppery tang of fresh trauma. It hit the house like a wall, even with the windows sealed shut. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape a cage built of bone. I slowly moved away from the door, careful not to let the floorboards creak, and made my way to the living room window, pulling back the thick, blackout curtain by the slightest fraction. Let me introduce myself, or what's left of me. I am Emma, a woman of 63, and up until this moment, I considered myself a realist. A survivor. I moved out here after my husband passed, seeking quiet solitude and a life free from the incessant chatter of the modern world. I knew the dangers: bears, coyotes, the occasional aggressive buck. I had defenses and experience. But nothing, absolutely nothing, in my 63 years prepared me for what I was about to face. I had been alone for years, and now, in this absolute, suffocating silence, I realized I was utterly alone with something else. Outside, the three-quarter moon was high, casting the woods in a spectral silver and black monochrome. Everything looked normal. The pines stood tall, their shadows long and sharp. I saw nothing. I was about to dismiss the whole thing as an anxious old woman's imagination when the movement came, not from the woods, but from the edge of my own driveway. It was immense. It didn't walk, it loped in a terrifying, ground-eating gait that was too fast to be a man, and too tall to be any known four-legged creature. It was hunched, but even in that posture, its shoulder line was above the hood of my parked truck. The thing was not a majestic wolf, not a romantic monster from a fantasy book. It was a grotesque, living nightmare. Its body was impossibly muscular, corded with sinew that stretched the patchy, gray-brown fur. The fur wasn't thick like a wolf's, it was coarse and thin in places, revealing large swaths of gray, diseased skin covered in festering patches and ridges. It was disproportionate. The front limbs, which acted as secondary legs when it moved, were massive, ending in heavy, black claws that gouged the packed dirt of the driveway. Its legs seemed unnaturally long for its torso, giving it that disturbingly fast, loping movement. But it was the head that truly shattered my sanity. It was canine in structure, but brutally flattened across the muzzle, giving it a cruel, almost piggish bluntness. The eyes were small, deep-set, and shone with an abysmal, focused yellow light that spoke of zero comprehension, only absolute, hateful hunger. There was no nobility, no intelligence, just raw, malignant savagery. The mouth was slightly open, not panting, but perpetually ready, showing rows of dull, yellow teeth that looked like broken-off chunks of ceramic. It made no sound, yet it emanated violence. I let the curtain fall, breathing in short, shallow gasps. Barnaby gave a single, terrified whimper and was silent again. The creature stopped at the property line and simply stared at the house. I could feel its gaze through the thick wood and plaster, a tangible pressure pressing against the window. It wasn't sniffing the air, it was simply calculating. I had always kept my remote cabin well supplied and secure. I had reinforced every window and door after a local break-in a decade ago. Now, I realized my efforts were pathetic against something this large and this determined. It moved again, slowly, deliberately circling the small, fenced-in yard where I keep my meager vegetable patch. Each footfall was heavy and measured. It moved not like a panicked beast, but a predator surveying a guaranteed meal. The next morning, I couldn't move until the sun was high enough to pour streams of defiant gold light through the living room window. When I finally dared to check, the back gate of my small vegetable patch was ripped clean off its hinges. The claw marks on the splintered wood were easily a foot long, reaching deep into the grain. I saw the tracks, three-toed, huge, unlike any wolf or bear I had ever known, sometimes showing the distinct knuckles of a palm as if the creature had paused to lean. That was the first night. The weeks that followed were a gradual descent into a waking nightmare, a psychological siege. I became a prisoner in my own home, a state of constant, adrenalized fear. The beast of LBL, as the terrified, hushed whispers from the few local rangers and loggers eventually labeled it, was not just a random killer, it was a hunter with a routine. Every few nights, always under the cloak of darkness, the same smell, the same heavy thud, the same unnerving silence would return. It never attacked my house immediately. It would stalk. It would test the perimeter. It would circle. The only reason I knew I wasn't hallucinating was the news. Or rather, the lack of news, replaced by the disappearance of a Forest Service patrolman, followed by the gruesome, partial remains of a logging surveyor found 3 miles down the road near the Devil's Backbone Trail, not eaten, but seemingly torn apart with indiscriminate fury and left. This creature wasn't killing for food alone, it killed because it could, with a malice that was chillingly human in its excess. My defense became an obsession. I boarded up every window with thick plywood, leaving only small, reinforced peepholes. I stacked furniture against the doors. I kept a rotation of powerful antique bear traps, heavy steel jaws, placed strategically outside my perimeter, but the creature seemed to sense them, skirting their locations with unnerving precision. I slept only when exhaustion forced me, always with a heavy-gauge hunting rifle loaded and resting on the nightstand. One evening, I found myself in the most terrifying situation yet. It was dusk, a rainy, miserable Tuesday. I had stepped out for a moment to retrieve a bucket of firewood I had left near the porch, breaking my own cardinal rule of never venturing out after 4 p.m. As I turned back toward the door, I saw it. It was about 50 yards away, standing upright near the tree line. The rain flattened its filthy, patchy fur, making its immense, distorted musculature stand out like a geological feature. It stood on 2 legs, hunched slightly, but its balance was perfect, its arms hanging low, massive hands twitching. Its head was slightly tilted, and I knew, with the absolute certainty of a prey animal, that it saw me. The fear that hit me wasn't panic, it was a cold, paralyzing dread. I couldn't move. The creature didn't move either. It just watched. For a sickening moment, it was less like a monster and more like a depraved, demonic parody of a man waiting for a signal. I finally managed to lurch back inside, dropping the firewood. I slammed the door and threw the deadbolt, my breath rasping in my throat. Immediately, the beast moved. The sound was horrifying. A sudden, short burst of speed, accompanied by the crashing of undergrowth. It was running toward my house. I heard the sickening impact as it hit the porch steps, followed by a heavy, ripping sound as it tore apart the simple railing. I scrambled back, fumbling for my rifle, when the front door, the heavy oak I had relied on, suddenly splintered. Not from a bash, but from a persistent, forceful push. The wood groaned, and a sliver of darkness appeared where the jam was starting to fail. I could hear its ragged, non-speaking breath, a wheezing sound like air being pumped through a throat full of grit. Then, a single, impossibly long, black claw shot through the crack near the handle, scratching against the inner metal of the lock plate. This was the attack. This was the end of the siege. I lifted the rifle, aiming at the sliver of space where the claw emerged. The sight of that filthy, scaly skin and razor tip was all I needed to overcome the paralysis. I wasn't shooting at a beast, I was defending my right to live against a malicious entity. I fired. The sound of the shot was deafening in the confined space. A high-pitched, guttural shriek, not a howl, but a noise of agony and rage, erupted from the other side of the door. The claw retracted instantly, and the splintering stopped. The heavy, retreating sounds, a panicked mix of loping footfalls and branches breaking, moved quickly away from the house. It ran not toward me, but away, a massive, wounded thing escaping into the safety of the dark forest. I didn't move for an hour, the rifle still smoking slightly. When I finally collapsed, it wasn't from relief, but from the crushing weight of the knowledge that I had only wounded it, not killed it. I never saw the beast of LBL again, but the terror never left. I checked the locks a dozen times a night. I have nightmares where the smell is real and suffocating. The thing wasn't a myth, it was a living, breathing, festering horror, and it is still out there, somewhere in the darkness of the land between the lakes. The claw marks remain on my door, a permanent, horrifying reminder of the night I looked into the eyes of pure, animalistic evil.